one of the primary challenges of cooperative living, having, to realize its potential, is being able to see accurately how the people around you, your other members in the group, are different than you, and that's okay.
Okay, here we are. Welcome everyone to the Filling Leadership Roles in Your Community webinar with the one and only Laird Schaub. My name is Lauren. I am your host for this session. So if you encounter any tech issues or otherwise need some assistance, please don't hesitate to send me a private message in the chat and I will be happy to help you out. All right, now I'm going to introduce our special guest today, Laird Schaub. Laird's specialty is up-tempo, inclusive meetings that engage the full range of human input, teaching groups to work creatively with conflict and diversity, all the while being ruthless about capturing as much product as possible. He lived for 4 decades at Sandhill Farm, an income-sharing rural community that he helped found. Laird also helped found the Foundation for Intentional Community, where he served as the main administrator for 28 years. In 1987, he created a self-insurance fund for healthcare among income-sharing communities called PEACH, which he ran for 22 years. And PEACH stands for Preservation of Equity Accessible for Community Health. Okay, and with that, I am going to officially hand over the microphone to you, Laird. Again, thank you for joining us. And over to you.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay. This is a taste of what I have to offer on the topic of power and leadership in community. That's a prelude to a course, a 10-hour course that starts in 2 weeks. For that, you have to pay, but for today, you can be here for free. And it's a chance to find out whether or not you think I know what I'm talking about, or the way I deliver information you think would be useful and accessible to you. So there'll be a chance today. Mostly I'm going to present some things, and I'll pause frequently to ask if there's comments. So we got some chance to go back and forth. I'll work off of a slide set. It's not very long, but I think you have access to it. If you don't have to copy everything down. You can go back and get copies through Lauren without having to frantically make notes. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the first slide, Lauren. All right, one of the things that makes this a powerful topic, and this is the first time I'm presenting this material webinars, is that all groups have wrestled with dynamics around power and leadership, and a lot of them struggle with it. And I want to talk about why that happens, and what it looks like, and what the way through it is. So that's kind of basically what I'm going to try to cover today. There'll be a lot more depth about this, all of these things, in the context of the 10-hour course, but we're going to touch on these things today. Almost everybody that comes into community has personal stories about leaders who abuse their power. I mean, you've been in a situation where somebody's been above you, or somebody you've witnessed, and you feel like they didn't do well. And there's lots of ways that could look, but there's leeriness around it, around leaders who seem power hungry, or don't really share the stage, or don't listen to other people, run roughshod over other people, or somewhat arguing what they do. Whatever those things are, we've got stories, not that all leaders are that way, but we all have been hurt, and we know people that have been hurt. And one of the things that motivates people in general about moving to community is we can leave that behind. That is, in community, finally we can create a culture, a cooperative culture, where that won't be characteristic, where we won't have that happen. All right, so I think that's naive. That's what I say in here. It can lead to naive expectations. And I want to name 2 in particular that they're certainly not ubiquitous, but they're relatively common. And the first one is that there will be no leaders per se in the community. We don't have leaders here. That is, we collectively do things together, and we don't defer to a leader in how we operate. Okay. Now, so I'll talk about that one. And the second one is that power will be evenly distributed among members. That's like, in other words, we all have equal say. Everyone's opinion gets weighted equally. and that'll be a healthier, different way to operate. Now, let me just pause here and say, do either or both of these have resonance for people in the group today? Any comments about that? I mean, said like, oh yeah, I think that, or my group largely does. Any comments? What do you see?
Yeah, we got several people saying yes in the chat. And okay. Eastland, I see that your hand is raised. What you got? Feel free to unmute.
I'm so sorry for being late. I'm just apologizing. We have load shedding here in South Africa quite often, and so it happens. Anyway, so I'm just apologizing. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, if there's not, I mean, if there's not other questions, but a lot of people said yes. Okay, so that and it's not everybody thinks that, but it is not unusual. All right, so let's go back to slides. Now I labeled these as naive, so let's just sit with it a little bit. With the first one about no leaders, I want to make a distinction that's important here between somebody who is an identified leader in the group, which tends to be a loaded adjective, and someone filling a leadership role. I'm going to make the case that unless your group is very small, like 5, 6 people or something like that, that you're going to want to delegate things and divide things up so everybody isn't doing everything. That it makes sense to assign work to people who are more motivated, skilled, and available to do things than others, because everybody's life situation is not the same. So you use thought about how to divide these things up, and then give responsibility to people who have experience and demonstrated, the ability to operate well in the group. All those things it makes sense to fill leadership roles with it. Now, that doesn't mean this is an assignment for life. It just means that dividing it up and having leadership roles filled is a necessary and appropriate function for groups to work effectively. And so you have leadership things going on where some people have more responsibility in certain areas than others. It doesn't mean they are the leader in the sense of we follow what this person says. That is a model of community. There are such models out there, and I'm not here to trash that model. I think the important thing is you know what you're getting into, and there are groups where the deal is if you join that group, there's a surrender to that person's wisdom or a group's central organizing group's wisdom, and that is a long-standing model that some communities follow. Most of the people that join these webinars and stuff aren't in that place. They want the collectively decide that the group holds the authority. And I'm just saying, if you hold it constantly in the whole and never delegate to managers or teams, you're going to drown in the trivia of all the stuff you need to do. You have to think, what do we need to do collectively, and what makes sense on a more minor level with guidance to hand off to other groups. And so that means you're going to designate. We're expecting a team or an individual to lead in some sense, and on a rotating basis, who's in that role, but the leadership function is not either inappropriate or a sign of failure of the dream. That's the first piece. Let me stop there before I take the piece and see, does that make sense? Or is there pushback on what I'm just said?
Not seeing any pushback. We've got a comment from Elizabeth that says, I tend to resist leaders who are there simply because of position. I welcome leaders who really know how to lead, but there are almost always leaders. Okay, all right, fair enough. I'll say more about that. But I just want to make the case that you've got a sorting of assignments and responsibilities where everyone's not doing everything makes sense. That's the main thing I'm saying. And you're foolish to pretend that everyone's equally able to do everything just because of just the differences in availability, skill, and motivation. We're not all the same. So let's intelligently sort people so that the right people are in the right spots, and then put in checks and balances, which I'm not saying you just turn them loose and they do whatever they want. That's not what I'm saying. But the fact that you've got that kind of assignment is not a sign of ill health. And in fact, if you never do that, if you never delegate, it will not work well.
is the point I'm trying to make. All right, so now let's go back to slides and take the second line, which was about power. There's often this dream of like, okay, everybody's got equal say, and it's true that there should be the opportunity, I think, in groups that are trying to operate collectively and decide collectively, for every member's input to be heard on a topic that that got something relevant to say. However, power doesn't mean that power really is defined, I think, or best understood in the context of group dynamics as influence, as the ability to get someone to agree with or to do something. That you have power if you can get others to follow that. And I'm not, I mean, sometimes it could be coercive. I'm not talking about that. They're persuasive. And so power is going to not be group because experience, wisdom, articulation, all these different things are not evenly distributed in the group. Furthermore, let me just leave that at there. So it's like, it's not the same, and it's not a sign of ill health in the group that there's a power imbalance or ingredients. The question really should be, what is power balance? Is there a problem with that being used? That's where I want you to focus, and that's subtly different than you've got more power than I do. That may be so, that may not be a problem. This is an area of expertise for them. It is not for you. Their opinion is going to have more weight because of the breadth of their experience. Now, I want to distinguish that from power gradients that you don't want to encourage, such as those that accrue from privilege. Like, for example, I'm an older white guy who has no trouble speaking in front of the group. He's got got a college degree, and there's a deference to that kind of credential in the mainstream culture that's got nothing to do with whether I know what the hell I'm talking about. I mean, that's just that's a privilege thing, and we don't want to encourage that. Okay, so but there are ways to influence by virtue of they've demonstrated an ability to think well for the group, and that their background on this particular topic is relevant. And so, we pay attention to the people with experience. That just makes sense in general. That doesn't mean they're going to be right. It just means they're given more weight. And that's not a sign of ill health. Rather than just like spin the wheel and do whatever anybody says, that isn't, that's just not using discernment. So let me pause there. And so I'm saying power is not going to be evenly distributed, and that's not necessarily a bad sign. Comments about that?
There is a comment in here from Washaka. Hello, glad you're here. And the comment seems like you're confusing leading and managing. Wondering what your response is to that.
Leading and managing. Well, somebody who is managing is going to be performing a leadership function. So there's definitely some overlap here. I think somebody. So I say any manager is to some extent in a leadership position. Now I'm going to say a little bit more about how to set that up well. I'm not just assuming that it's going to go okay just because you got it set up that way. We're going to talk about some of the dangers. I'm just saying it's not necessarily a problem that you have it. And I'm going to talk more about the dangers here in a minute. So hold your reservation and let me see if I address it and what I say next. And if I don't, come back to it, please. Anything else?
Great, thanks, Laird. Iselin, did you have something else?
Yes, I did actually. What I want to say is that I've lived in Camp Hill communities for some 15 years. Different communities at different times in the biography of Camp Hill, and with different modes of community life and management. And what I'm feeling and hearing from my own experience is that leadership is what you said just now, demonstrated ability, and that it is a service. You're serving the needs of a group. And when you're a manager, sometimes you are serving a salary, a role, a hierarchy. Manager has a different kind of it's got a corporate history, perhaps, or it's got another energy to a leader. For me, a servant leader is somebody who can hold a process and has abilities, and, as you said, think for the group, but perhaps not a manager. Manager just delegates and says, you do that, you do that, you do that. And maybe, I'm not sure, maybe a manager could also be a servant leader. I don't know. I'm just raising it, those two words, leadership and manager, as carrying some weight and some energy, actually.
Well, you raise an interesting point from that certain words have connotation and flavor. And I get from your comment, Eastlyn, that for you, manager is a more narrow and perhaps more bureaucratic feel to it than leader might be. And that I'm not trying to talk you out of your connotation, but when I use that term, it doesn't have that flavor for me.
Okay.
I want to talk about how they behave, what is good behavior and what is not good behavior, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. So okay. You know, if the group is assigned work to somebody, then they're managing that area in some way, either individually or as a team, and I don't think that's a bad thing per se. Okay. All right. Any other comments before I go back to slides?
Yeah, we've got a question from Todd. Leadership can come from a calling or by skill. How does this difference operate in community?
Well, you can't, a leader's going to need power that is influence to be able to function. In other words, if nobody believes what they say or how they operate, or there's low trust, and then they don't have much influence, and they're not going to be an effective leader. So you're going to need to be able to have people think that you've got, you know, the power you have is appropriate. That is, it's whatever amount of responsibility you're given by the group. Now you don't take it. The group agrees to that. You know, you don't get to just assume or grab leadership. You have influence because others are influenced by you, and that needs to be. And I'm arguing for, be conscious of that influence. Don't fall into the traps of privilege. And you know, this is the way we've always done it. We're trying to create a new culture that's sensitive and open to hearing the input from everybody. But that doesn't mean that some people aren't given more weight because of their background and their ability to think for the group and all those things. So we're going to talk about what good side is. I'm not just saying that you automatically get it, but there's a give and take. It's a system between the leader and the led, in the sense of, like, somebody doesn't have influence unless people agree with what they're saying and doing. Okay, let's go back to slides, and I'll develop more thoughts here, and then that may flesh out the concepts. So at any rate, let's go on to the next slide. So it's very important, in my view, that there be conversations at the group level about the second point is, what do we want from people that fill leadership roles? I mean, what are we looking for, rather than just, oh, everybody understands it? Because if you just assume we all have the same picture, that's going to be a problem. It's not going to be that way. People will be holding different things. We're seeing people's behavior, past experience and past hurts, and applying standards there that other people don't even know they're doing. It's very messy. So it's important that the group have a conversation about what constitutes healthy leadership in our group, and get explicit about it. I think that's important. And amazingly, over and over again, when I work with groups, I'm a consultant, I've worked with maybe 150 groups. It's rare that I come across a group that has had this conversation. And I mean, their function, they got people in leadership roles, but they never stopped and talked about what do we want? What do we want to support? What do we want to reinforce with people in those roles, versus what do we not want to recapitulate from what was not working in the mainstream experience? All right, so that's the second piece. The third one here, similarly, is, has your group talked about how power is distributed, or what is its healthy uses? What is it? How do we understand that? So that if there's somebody's claim that power is being abused, what do we mean by that? and how do we deal with it? If some people, going back to the prior slide, simply say power is imbalanced, and since my dream is that it will be evenly distributed, there's automatically a problem with the imbalance. And I'm saying not necessarily, but you need to talk about it so you have a common framework to understand this topic. Because if you see it through a different lens, you can understand quickly how messy it gets trying to figure out where to go, because you don't even have the same objective in mind. All right, so that's the second piece. And so what I want to let me actually come back out. I'll come back to the first one in a minute, but let's come back out. And what I'm really asking you, has groups you're in, I don't know how many call, how many in your cooperative groups have had a conversation about this is what we want in people filling leadership roles, A, or B, this is how we understand power and how we try to work with it in a healthy way. Have you had those at the group level? Anybody?
Got a couple no's, no yeses yet.
I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm just trying to say, I think this is, here we go. Here's a yes. All right, that's great. So some have, and that's great. I'm just thinking everybody needs to talk about this. It's very important you have a common framework. This is a incendiary topic, either one of them. It tends to be it flares up when there's an accusation that leaders have misused their power or performed poorly. This tends to be a very awkward conversation, and it often doesn't happen because people are afraid it'll blow up. And yet it doesn't get better not being taught. Instead, it's talked about in the parking lot, or it's talked about in the mailroom, but it's not talked about in the meetings. And it's like that, we got to do better than that. And the starting place is generic, not talk about individuals at the outset, but let's talk about where are we trying to go with this? These are elements of community life. Let's get intentional about it. Intentional community. It's concept. And so we're trying to get that clear so that when somebody's got a problem, they've got some kind of standard to apply it against, rather than it's just a beauty contest. I don't like Paul, so I blame Paul as a bad leader. It's like, well, what are we talking about? And so, and what standard is an acceptable one to have concerns about? So that's why you got to talk about these things before that's not simple, but it's doable. And then you've got a framework for when you have the sense that somebody's done something inappropriate, you can hang your hat on the outcome of the prior conversation. Does that make sense? I mean, there'll be more in the whole course about how to do this well. I can only cover so much ground today, but it's foundational. You understand, you got to talk about this stuff. Not talking about it doesn't work. All right, let's go back to slides. The first piece on here I mentioned a little bit earlier today, which is that there's a very important distinction, I think, between having identified leaders, which is most people have an aversion to in a collective secular group, and people filling. I went over that a little bit earlier, but I'm just mentioning this important to make that distinction. This is not, it makes to have some people do it on behalf of everybody. Hopefully we can find people with the right fit to fill those slots, and then everything will go more smoothly. We don't need everybody's involvement in all levels of decisions. It makes a lot of sense to delegate on some level. So you have the maintenance team for the community being filled with people. You got an electrician, you got a plumber, you got a carpenter, rather than just 3 random names out of the membership. It makes sense to have the right people in the right slots. And so, and they may be in those roles for a while. They may teach others, and after a while they rotate out and somebody else comes in. I don't think there's anything wrong with that model. But they're filling a role rather than they're, the maintenance god for life. All right. So let's go on to the next slide. So I want to talk about why. I've already mentioned a few things, but I want to dig a little deeper into what gets in the way of having these conversations. I sort of implied that if you have no agreement about what power means or how we think of it in a healthy way, or no agreement about a healthy model for leadership, then you haven't identified what behaviors are problematic and which might be beneficial. And so when somebody brings up an issue, there's no way to evaluate, or even if you're looking at how did so-and-so do in a role of a leadership role, what are the standards you're applying it against? You don't want to make it up in the moment or after the fact. You actually want to put that out up front so people know what will be expected of them. And then there's more like, for instance, let's suppose one of the pieces you say, which I think is reasonable, you expect leaders to do a good job of informing people in the community of action in their area. It's a way of information flow, reporting standards. And a good leader will see that that information is provided in an accurate and timely way. That's just one of the things that's expected. So you may have a complaint that you're never seeing reports from that person's managership or that person's committee. And so that's a problem. And it's not that you dislike them, is they're failing to meet a standard of behavior that was made explicit. So you see, that lands differently, hopefully, than I don't like you. This is now, I don't like that I'm not getting the minutes because that was put forward as an expectation and you're not meeting it. So that one thing is a problem we can do to clear it up rather than you're a bad person. There's a difference there. And that's what I mean by, you don't want to be in the jungle ball. Anything goes. Anybody can apply their individual screen for what's healthy or not, because we've never talked about it as a group. All right, next piece. Almost always in my experience, the people filling leadership roles believe they're doing a service to the group. Now, they may not be as skillful as they think they are, or they may make mistakes, don't get me wrong. However, they see it as I'm stepping up to the group by doing this thing. This is a need. I can fill it. I think I have the skill. They put themselves forward. So when they are criticized for what they have done, it can often be associated in a heartbeat with, you don't think I'm in integrity, meaning I believe I'm acting in the group's best interest and you disagree. Now there can be honest disagreement about what's in the group's best interest. So it needs to be possible for that criticism to come forward. If you're unhappy with the way a person's performing, it can be difficult for the person to hear it because they associate my worth, my role, my integrity, who I am is associated with my serving in this way. And so this is like an arrow to the heart when you criticize me. Now you can't, so it's a problem. And then people see that happening and then they're very hesitant to say anything critical because they don't want to hurt that person's feelings. But meanwhile, they're unhappy with what they're doing. So there's a broken chain in here when this is allowed to stand. All right, but this is one of the dynamics that makes it hard. The third piece is an interesting one, distinguishing between projection and blind spots. It is often difficult in a moment where, say, somebody doesn't like what a leader's done, and they'll say, now it can be hard to tell, are they projecting onto this person simply because they see all leaders as with skepticism and doubt whether or not it can be done cleanly, and so they suspect nefariousness or ill intent, and they don't really have evidence of that. They just are having a negative reaction to somebody in a leadership role, and so they're projecting onto that person from prior experience that's not fair to the current person. That's the projection part. The blind spot is working at it from the other way, where the leader, especially somebody with my package who's got a lot of privilege, am I just simply blind and insensitive to the ways in which other people struggle when I've had it easy? And so I am insensitive to the concerns and the balancing needs. And so I'm getting important feedback, but I don't see it. And so it looks like, oh, you're just being unfair and you're just taking it out on me. You're projecting onto me when part of the problem, or maybe most of it, is that I am not seeing what everybody else sees. And so it can be hard to distinguish between how much is projection and how much is blind spots. Neither may be in play, but sometimes both are. And it can be very confusing. Where do we go with this? How do we unpack it? It can be very tender and awkward from both ends. The last piece is not conflating impact with intent. So you want everybody to have good intent. However, that doesn't mean that the impact will always be good. I mean, regardless of how well you intend things to go and how much your actions, especially as a leader, are meant to be improving the group, it could land in a way that favors some and disfavors others. And it looks like you're playing. And so even though that wasn't what you had in mind, that's the way it looks. And so it is not you do not want the leaders who are facing some criticism to say, well, I didn't mean that. It's like, that doesn't actually matter. We don't need to assign bad intent. The fact is the impact. You need to be concerned with impact, even when your intent is good. It doesn't excuse impact that lands poorly, that you have good intent. You also need to care about how it lands, because the heart-blood of community is relationships, and that means impact matters. You know, you do the best with that, but then you constantly should be open to how we're landing. Am I getting the result I intended? Is there a problem? How do I need to make adjustments? What do I own that, oh my God, I see that you were embarrassed or called out in a way that I didn't intend, and now I realize that was probably a mistake and I'm sorry. That kind of thing. Can you do that? Can a leader apologize? So it's important to distinguish between impact and intent. Let's come back out, Lauren, comments about any of that. I'm trying to explain why, yeah, this is messy.
Yeah, we've got a couple related questions in the chat here. This one's from Bree. I was hoping you would talk about encouraging more people in a community to step into responsibility/leadership roles rather than always depend on a rather small group of people. Right. Is that part of your plan?
Well, yeah, there's a couple parts of it. I mean, this will be fleshed out more in the course, but one of them is, I think there's a lot of benefit if you do the work of laying out, these are the qualities we want in people filling leadership roles, or which are both, there's generic things like we always want the person to be honest. We want to share information easily. They want them to be approachable. Those kinds of things are generic, but some of them are specific to the assignment. Like if you go back to what I said before, if the area is in the maintenance committee, then you need somebody you want somebody who's got maintenance experience, so they understand the lay of the land and the vocabulary and how the needs impact people, rather than just somebody randomly. All right, so if you lay that out, now you make it more discreet in terms of being able to, if I've got a problem, it should be related to what we asked you to do and the ways in which somebody thinks you've fallen short, rather than just, do we like you? All right, so that should make it a little bit easier. There's another component, which I don't know today, that it tends to be a habit. I'm not quite sure why all this is, that in progressive culture and cooperative cultures, there's a tendency to over-criticize and underappreciate that in relationship. So if you make clear what the standards are of behavior, don't miss out on the chance to celebrate when somebody does well. And so if you have regular evaluations of somebody filling a leadership role, which I recommend, and I don't mean every 6 weeks, I mean every year or 2 years or something, a performance review, it's a chance not just to say, these are the ways in which we'd like to see you get better, but these are the ways in which we asked you to perform and you did well. Thank you. And it's like actually stopping and giving balloons and cake to people who do well, so that they feel like they're seen and that their contribution and service is recognized. It under happens in most groups. And on the other side of it is, and I feel free to shoot an arrow at somebody whenever I feel like there's something wrong. And so one of the things that inhibits people stepping forward to fill leadership roles is, it looks like a starvation diet. I mean, I'm going to take shit for 2 years that I'm in this role, and I'm not going to get seen for my contribution. That's not very attractive. All right. So you can talk about that as a culture and what you can do to shift it. The other piece is whether or not you want a standard, which I recommend, if it depends on skill to get its needs met, that there be a commitment from the people who have that skill, if they're able. I mean, if they've got the bandwidth to do it, and especially if they fill that role, that they dedicate part of their time to teaching others who would like to learn that skill. So you broaden the base of people who can replace and rotate through. So you enhance the ability of membership collectively to be able to fill those roles. You don't need everybody able to do everything, but you want enough room that you can reasonably rotate through and have as many people as possible filling a leadership role that's a good match for their skill and their availability. So those are some things specifically you can do that will help broaden the base. All right, is there another question?
Yeah, there is. Thank you for that, Laird. This one is linked to that question. This one's from Lynn. How do you address questions about centralized power when those people are not willing to come forward and help?
Okay, well, that's a good one. I mean, if you got a problem and you just sit and you just make side comments or just talk in the parking lot, that's not, you need to show up with your concern. And then that means the community, the other side of that, I mean, you have to have the courage to state what's not working. And then the community needs to do the work of making, and this is a difficult challenge for all of us. How do you handle critical feedback in a way that's clean and authentic? So you're not sugarcoating and you're not ducking, and that somebody is not punished because they spoke up. So in other words, if somebody tries what I'm saying, have the courage, get up there and say your thing, and they get creamed for it because the person reacts badly, and this power, and they feel like they're bullied by the leader, and the group allows that to happen, they're not going to come back and do it a second time. It's terrible. So there needs to be a lot of attention paid to how do we do feedback cleanly and see that it's not blocked or suppressed because of fear or bad experiences. And this is not a simple skill. It's going to require the ability to work emotionally as well as with thoughts. And a lot of times communities haven't made clear that that's what territory we're going to need to go into when they develop the membership and had people buy their houses. A lot of groups figure this out only after they've built the community. And it's like, it's pretty scary for some people who are not necessarily comfortable in that realm. And if you handle the emotions badly, people are going to be hurt. It's not going to be fixed. And then you got broken links, low trust. And then you get this phenomenon of people like, it's not safe for me to speak up, so I'll do it in the only way I know how. And then it becomes like this negative thing that it breeds in the dark, and it's not a happy scene. So there's a whole package here about having clean feedback. So it's not just be courageous. The community has to support that person stepping forward. All right, what else?
I see a raised hand from Jennifer. Jennifer, if you want to unmute and ask your question, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. It's really reassuring to hear you say all that about the way that power is managed and how emotions are managed in the room if those people aren't supported to speak out, because it makes me realize that it's obviously common. It's common enough that we're needing to talk about it here. The other thing that I was thinking about when you were saying about celebration, when we celebrate people's successes and rather than just shoot them down, is what I've noticed is that if we have a culture where we don't actually address issues and confront problems, then people are far less likely to want to celebrate when those leaders achieve something. And then you end up with the cycle I've noticed of those leaders trying harder and harder to prove themselves and taking actions that may not align with group value, and then less appreciation when they succeed at something.
Yeah, you can, I guess, have a problem both ways. The more common one in my experience is that leaders are underappreciated. Good leaders will know that appreciation needs to happen, but they can't lead it for themselves. That doesn't work. So somebody else has got to make sure that happens. So either some other leader or some other group. And it's rather than, oh, now it's time to applaud me. That's not going to land. And so, or you can have the phenomenon that if dissent is quashed or concerns are not addressed cleanly, and therefore then the appreciation will ring false, and it feels like, yeah, okay, that may be true, but what about these other things that aren't so great? We don't talk about those. So you really, the most important thing is having clean feedback loops, and that is not a trivial challenge. A lot of groups struggle with that, but and I don't want you to miss though the opportunity to say thank you when somebody does do well. All right.
Great. We have another question in the chat from Helen. What do you think about shared managerships, co-leadership roles?
It's fine. I mean, I just think you just have to be clear who's doing what, and there's a lot of pluses. For instance, if somebody's got a concern with the managership, It's, one person may be more approachable to somebody than another. I mean, so you want the two people to have good chemistry with them. It's often, though, more effective if they're dissimilar in style. And so if you can get them to get along well with each other, but present a different personality and a different point of entree, that's probably a strength. And also it allows one person to go on vacation and the other one's still on duty. There's a lot of pluses. You just have to be mindful of, like, I've only got so many people and so many slots, and we can't double up on everything. And because a lot of groups feel like, well, it's easier for us to create slots than it is to fill them. So if you double fill them, that's, you can see you run out of candidates quick. So there's discernment here. But the important thing is two things. You want the experience to be positive for the people in that role, and you want the group to be well served. So you want to define what is wanted from that role, and you want the people to get along, that is the two people that are sharing. But I have no problem at all with co-managerships. In fact, that's just a natural extension of collaborative living when you got a good fit.
Great, thank you, Laird. We do have a couple of raised hands. Do you want to take those questions now or in a bit?
Yeah, go ahead. This is where I kind of want to play it off. I'm not going to run out of material. I'm just trying to give you a sense of what I can work with. So let's go with the questions.
Okay, great. Lynn, you're up first.
Yeah, I guess my question is just kind of overarching about everything that you've talked about as responses to the questions. Will those be a part of this program that you're headlining here?
Yeah. This material will be covered, in another somewhat different context and in greater depth. This is a 1-hour deal as a prelude to a 10-hour course on this topic.
I just want to make sure that your course does cover like this clean feedback loop, the evaluation of leadership roles, et cetera, everything. Okay, that's all.
Yep.
Great, thanks for that question, Lynn. All right, trying to do these in order. I think Washika is next. Go ahead.
Washaka. Policy governance speaks to exactly the issue you were just discussing. They spend a lot of time helping people understand how to build in routine feedback and expectations for which everybody gets together and agrees, how well did this group or manager or leader do on this task or committee or something we set them up, like monthly or bi-monthly. So there's no surprises. You don't get 1 year or 2 years in and discover, oh, we think you did a crappy job for the last 2 years, which is devastating. But if it's done in the spirit of feedback that you would like to hear yourself, so how do you get constructive criticism? And as I pointed out in the chat, Toastmasters has an excellent process for how to deliver feedback to people, which is all about, simply stated, you just sandwich it between what I liked about what you did, how I would improve it if it were me, and then what inspired me about what you did. When you package that, people hear it better. That too quick?
Thank you for the comment.
Yeah.
I got a few responses. I'm not attached to a particular time frame of evaluation. It's a dance between, are we getting useful information? Is this a good use of time, rather than it's repetitive and pro forma? How frequently you need to do it so that you're catching things early enough, but not being repetitive, so that you can figure it out. And this may be very situation specific. So I don't want to have one rule. That's not what I'm advocating. I just want, most groups do it poorly or not at all, and that can't be the right answer. So there needs to be a performance evaluation at some point. Leaving aside the question of frequency, now I want to talk about when you set it up. I would recommend, actually, as a way that I found tends to work better, is you start with a self-evaluation in front of the group. So the person says, this is what I've been accomplishing. This is what I think I've done well. This is the things where I feel like I can improve. This is my ideas about how I'm going to do it. And then there's an opportunity for people to make comments, so for instance, if somebody's sitting on a criticism and the manager already is aware of it and owns it, you don't need to say it again. So in other words, that thing that you were poised to say has been covered. Now that doesn't mean they're going to do a good job of remediation, but you don't need to beat them over the head is the point. So I think that tends to set a tone a little bit softer. It doesn't mean that people can't say things and that the manager's done a good job of self-evaluation, but I recommend you start there. The second piece that I wanted to comment on is about the feedback sandwich. If you're getting good, if you're getting good results with that, okay. But what I've learned, people are very clever, Wasaka. And so like, for instance, if I know that that is the norm in the group, I immediately discount the first thing said and waiting for the thing that they really want to say. And so it's like, it's just like, to me, I can't trust the compliment, because I know that's a necessity to get access to the feedback that you want to say. And, that doesn't mean that the compliment isn't meant, but I can't know that because they're required to give it. So I just want to point out the danger of that. Okay. All right, let's go on. So if there's another comment.
Yeah, we've got, let's see, who's up next? Muja, go ahead and unmute. Okay, looks like you just muted yourself again.
Okay, there. Glad to be here. Thank you for your presence. The feedback is, I think, a very, very delicate and really does require skill, because all of us, I don't think anybody likes to be criticized at all, but so I'm really wanting to learn those skills. And so when you talked about how to do the critical feedback cleanly, I just wondered if you could give one or two examples.
Okay, let me say a little bit here, just because I agree it's a really important topic, and it's definitely related to this overall piece, even though it's a sub piece. I feel like you're gonna, first of all, you need general agreement that we're gonna do this. That I would say, and I don't know, a lot of groups put this in place, that every member should make available to all other members the opportunity for feedback about how they're performing as a member. So there's some things that are out of bounds. Like, for instance, I have a propensity to wear blue, and somebody may not like me wearing blue. Well, you know what? That's tough luck. I don't have to listen to feedback about I wear blue. That's not about what the community is about. However, if you have feedback around how I perform as the head of the maintenance committee, I think I need to be available for that. That's a community role, and it impacts you. And if you don't like something I've done in that line, you should be able to tell me. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to like it, but it's my job, I think, to be available for hearing it, and try to put a good spin on it as best I can. Now, I think the feedback is going to land better if you negotiate it with the person about, like, I've got something to say about your role as the maintenance head. Is this a good time to give it to you? So you don't just give it to them when you want to. You actually ask the person, because you'll find some people want it right away. Some people want to see it in writing. Some people next week. Some people want to organize their thinking before. There's just a lot of preferences. And the goal here is that it be given completely in a relatively timely way, in as friendly a way as possible. So if the recipient has a preference, try to say yes, as long as that can work with you. So negotiate the setting. And then the other piece is try to be very specific about what is the behavior that was problematic, in the context. These are the specifics. So you're giving detail about, this didn't work for me. This is the impact on me of this thing. Don't make a guess at the intent. Just say, this is the way what didn't work for me. This is how it's contrary to what I thought our understanding was, or what I would like our understanding to be. So and then this is, if this is the change I would like to ask you to make. That kind of formula will tend to be more productive than just, I don't really like how you're doing your job. I mean, that's kind of like a blanket shotgun approach. Is that helpful?
Very helpful. The challenge is just remembering to do that.
No. This is going to take a while to groove. I mean, mainstream culture is terrible at this in general. I mean, there's exceptions, but for the most part, it's bad. And so we're trying to figure out a skill that we should have learned in kindergarten,
Yeah.
But our schools don't teach it particularly. And so we got to recover, but it's doable. It is doable. Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure.
Great. Thank you, Muja and Laird. I think that's all we have as far as questions at the moment.
All right, let's go back. We can do a little bite. I can't remember where we are. Let's go back to slides. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, so I asked, you know, when somebody says there's an abuse of power, you can ask questions about, well, what actually are we talking about? That some have more power than others, which if you got from what I said earlier, I don't think that necessarily is a problem, is how it's not really that power is imbalanced, it's how it's being used. But that someone didn't use their power cleanly, and what does that mean? We'll talk about that in a bit. And that someone has used their power to limit or deny another in some way. Let's go to the next slide. I think I want to, is this a power? Yeah, this is where I wanted to get to. This is, I think, a really useful framework when you're thinking about if you think of power as neutral in of itself, influence in and of itself is not inherently good or bad. The important question is, how is the power used? If it is used for the benefit of the whole group, that's power with, that's good. You know, now that doesn't mean their idea is brilliant, but you can see how they're trying to hold the whole and advance the whole group with what they're suggesting. They've put their thinking through that lens and bring it forward in that way. That's an attempt to use power cleanly. On the other hand, if you use your influence to benefit some at the expense of others, that's what we don't want to see. I just had an example of that with a group I'm working with in California who approached me at a problem, or no, sorry, it's in British Columbia, but that doesn't matter. The point was that there was a new couple in there who maybe didn't get inculcated into the culture of the community so well. They got into a position of committee control, and then they started making decisions where they benefited substantially and others were hurt by it, and there was hell to pay. And it's like they thought, well, that's what I do on the outside. People who have responsibility get perks, and I'm taking advantage of it to make sure that I benefit from it. And they weren't thinking of the good of the group, and it blew up on them. And so this is where they were accused of misusing power, and they thought, I'm just using it the same way I always did. You know, in the mainstream, this is okay. Well, the community's different. And so defining that, and then as a basis for being concerned in what we want to raise questions about, becomes important. So this is not about how much power you've got, it's how well you use it. I think that's a powerful lens. Let's come back out. Let's do this, better be the last piece. Questions about that? Does that make sense? We'll go into more about this, of course, in the context of the course, but I want, this is a foundational understanding, all right? I mean, there's going to be nuance. Everybody's going to not agree what's best for the group. I mean, there could be honest disagreement about that, and that has to be worked through. But if you get it, why somebody has spoken up and they're thinking, I think this will work for everybody. They may be wrong, but you can see their intent was right, and they were trying to use their power well. Okay. All right. Rather than jumping in and trying to cram in another piece of question that you've got about either what will be covered in the course or something else that's churning for you based on the last hour. Anybody got something? I'm glad with the turnout. I'm excited. I hope some of you will be with me in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Laird. Yeah, now's the time to ask any other burning questions that you may have. We got Laird for another 3 minutes. Question from Todd. Is there a major theme of the course?
Yeah, I'm going to try to demystify the concepts of power and leadership, and then talk about these are the pitfalls. I've already given you some today, and this is why they occur. These are the remedies, and that why it's important that this be an area that you talk about, even though it's awkward or often lands poorly. And it's going to definitely get into this thing that I mentioned a little bit ago of like, you're going to need to be able to work emotionally, not just with thoughts here, in order to navigate this well, because it's in the room. And if you don't have this is another area, like, do you have an agreement to work emotionally? Lacking that, you're in trouble. And it's like, this is part of the package of the way through it.
Great. There's a question from Eastland. How about biography work in larger groups?
I don't understand the question. Say more.
All right. Give her a moment to respond. Eastland, go ahead.
Huge. Okay. What I mean by that is you speak about agreements,
Yeah.
And agreements don't take into account the person's abilities to be relational exactly. And there might be biographical points in all of our lives that make relationship difficult. So that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Actually, that part of community building, I think, could include biography work on some level. If they're, you know, when people are interested in that and want to go deeper into sharing, because actually I understand somebody more deeply if I know what they've been through, if I have been able to walk in their shoes a little bit. So I'm talking about intentional communities where people are living together day and night, or having lots to do with each other. That's what I'm talking about, the biography of each of us.
I understand better now your point. I agree very much with that. I've come in the last year to this articulation that one of the primary challenges of cooperative living, having, you know, to realize its potential, is being able to see accurately how the people around you, your other members in the group, are different than you, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that requires the kind of work, I'm trying to condense it to one sentence, but it's going to require unpacking. Let me hear your stories. Let me who you are, what you know, what's comfortable, what your preferences are about how you organize information, how you communicate, you know, all of these different things. You're going to have this wealth of answers. And it's not that you remember it all, but you start to build relationship through personal knowing. And so making time for that kind of sharing is very, very valuable. Okay, thank you, Eastland, for that. And I think we are out of time. I hope we get to see a number of you in 2 weeks.
Yes, agreed. Thank you so much, Laird. I'm looking forward to diving more into this topic with you in the full course. So thank you so much again for offering this content and for you all for engaging with us. And if we don't see you in the course, we hope to see you in Zoomland again soon. So please take care and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye, everyone.